So we just did a walkthrough of what we created on the previous week, combining Node.express and React 19. So hopefully that's clear, and now we have this repository. So let's start creating some stuff in there. So remember, in order for us to do that, we need to have our backend running. So I have my backend here on the left, and I'm going to try to keep them like that so you can identify which one is which. And I'm going to have my front-end server on the right here, so we can be super clear which one is which, okay? We keep the two of them open, and as long as we have the configuration we have, then you can just test using the front-end. Close all of these so we can make sure that we are in the correct one, okay? So, one of the most basic things, like this gives us like the opportunity of actually start developing something in there. But let me go and just start creating like a basic example that I like giving when I'm starting to explain React. And let's say that, for instance, I want to create in here another section, and then I'm going to create like some voting in there. Okay. So for that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to include, let's say, for instance, voting list or something like that. And then notice that when I am going to be creating a component, a React component for this, and remember that the way that you use React components, the way you create React components is by creating a function, and that function in this case is going to be voting list. It's supposed to return whatever you want to show in there. So if this thing will play with me, voting list, and then it's just a component like that, and then you can see that is going to be rendered in there. Okay. Usually you want to have that on a separate file, so I'm going to put it in a separate file in a minute. But for the moment, one of the important things in here is that if you want to create a React component is basically, when we are using hooks, a React component is going to be a function that takes as parameter the props and returns some GSX of what it's supposed to render. But at the end of the day, it's just a JavaScript function. And the way you use it is not as a JavaScript function, but instead you use it as a HTML element, as if it were an HTML element, okay? So I am going to move this out to another file, and we are in the front end in the source folder. I did create one in there, so let me go and say in here, we are going to have like voting list or something like that. This is going to be GSX, and then I'm going to import that in there. And in order for us to use that outside, we have to export it, as I am doing in here. And then I want to import voting list from that one. Okay, so now I have that. Now, inside this one, what I'm going to say is, let's say that I create like a bunch of like a voter component. So I'm going to have like a voter component, and then that voter component is going to be something like this. And the cool thing about React, the way I want you to be thinking about React, is that you can create one of these voter components, but you can create like 4 of those, okay? And the idea of these ones, and I like doing that, something like that, is that I can go and say, yes, I want to vote for this one, or you can even put like a little emoji in there, like easy. So I want to vote for that one, and I could even go and say like how many votes I have. So I can put those in there, and then let's say that I want to put this one in here, and then I say how many votes I have. So the very first thing that I just want you to see is that if I want to use this variable, then when we are in GSX, it is very important that you remember GSX is an extension of JavaScript. And when you're in GSX, if you want to use a JavaScript expression, then you need to embed like a wrap, whatever you're going to write, into like curly brackets, as if it were like a block. So the moment I do that, then this is text. So I can go and say number of votes or something like that. And then this is actually going to be the variable. So if you see, if I put it like this, then you can see it's going to be like extra space. And even if, for instance, I do this, then it's just adding like an extra space in there. Does that make sense? So always remember, once you are in JSX, if you want to use an expression, like for instance, I could go and say this is going to be times 2 or whatever, and if this starts in 10 or whatever, then it's going to have that expression. It's just any JavaScript expression. So for the moment we have that. And then let's start like putting something that will make more sense. Like for instance, in order for you to have attributes in there, like if you want to have this, it's that probably you want to have who is the person you're voting for. So basically I want to say I want to vote for John or something. And if you want to accept that parameter, please notice that we are passing that parameter as if it were an HTML attribute. So the way that you receive those attributes is by accepting them as we call them props. Notice that you can go and say in here, hey, these are going to be my props. And then basically you can go and say this is vote for, and then strong, just to make it like a little bit more emphatic. And then I could go and say here props.name. So if like this is going to be like an object, like an actual object, and one thing I recommend you doing, it's like you can say, and I like putting like paint or whatever. Let's put a little painter in the render voter, okay? And then let's say I pass all the props in here. So if you do that, then I want you to see that in here on the console, remember, even though React seems like a completely different language, at the end of the day, it's just JavaScript. So as you can see, it's rendering 1 for each one of these ones. So if I remove these ones, then you're only going to see that twice. And the reason why you see that twice is because whenever you're doing React in the development mode, it is going to force you to mount or to render your component twice. The reason for that is that every component you create, you should try to follow the solid principles of design. Solid principles. Take a look at that if you haven't taken any class on that. Like one of the most important ones in here is like single responsibility, and keep it like each component like very specific to what it will do. The moment it starts growing larger, split it into multiple parts. Okay, now that component should know what it is doing, so that's why we are passing this name in here. And as I was saying, like the key is that it should render really quickly. If you have something really slow, I don't know, you're loading an LLM or whatever, and that is taking forever, you have to make sure that that's loaded somewhere else, because this component is going to be re-rendered every time something changes, and this function is going to be executed. So you want that to run really fast. Therefore, you have this multiple times. Now, if I actually, so if I do this one, no, there we go. So if I multiply that by put this multiple times, and then I could go and say this is Alexis, and then this is going to be Guerra, and this is going to be Gomez. I have many names. Then you can see that it's rendering for each one of those, and then you can see the different attributes. Okay, so that it's for that. So that's what we call props. Now, one of the nice features of being able to pass this as a JavaScript function is that in a JavaScript function you can destructure objects. So instead of having to pass the name, like the props, and then look inside what are the things, like in JavaScript we like not writing that much, or I like not writing that much. That's why I don't write Java. And then I could just go and say, get me an attribute called name, and then actually save it as a variable. So that's what's called object destructuring. Remember that you can always search for that on the MDN, because it's just basic JavaScript, and that is going to explain to you how you can do those things. There's multiple ways of doing that. The one that I'm kind of applying in there, it's similar to this one, and I think they even have one for function parameters, array destructuring, swapping, examples. Let me see. Function parameters in here. Do they have an example on that? I kind of remember seeing that, yeah, but I don't see anymore. Okay, but basically it's what we are doing in there. Okay, back to this. So these are going to be the props. So there is two types of data in a React component. You have the props, which are the attributes that your parent sends down to the children, and then you have the state, which are the parameters that the component will have inside. These votes is going to be, this votes variable, like the number of votes in there, is going to become our state in a minute. But let me show you how we could do this, okay? But before we do that, let me wrap up this video. Just as a quick reminder, what we did in here is that I created a couple components, and then I'm using those components, and the beauty of React is that I can just use multiple of those components wherever I want, and they all should work independently. So regardless of where I put them on my DOM, they should work independently. So that's the whole mentality of this, okay? In the next video, what I'm going to do then, it's first try to make like that when I click on this button, like the votes changes, okay? But let me wrap up in there.